The old man stepped onto the glossy marble floor of the luxury car dealership, his worn-out sneakers squeaking slightly with each step. His faded jeans were loose, the edges frayed, and his simple gray t-shirt had seen better days. His silver hair was unkempt, and his face bore deep lines, evidence of years lived, lessons learned, and hardships endured. But there was something about his posture, the quiet confidence in his eyes, that suggested he wasn't just another wanderer off the street. Yet to the salesman lounging by the entrance, chuckling over their morning coffee, he was just that, an old man with no business being there. One of them, a tall young man in a sharp navy suit, nudged his colleague. "Look at that guy," he muttered under his breath. "Probably lost or just looking to waste our time." The other one smirked and shook his head. They'd seen people like him before, window shoppers, dreamers, time wasters. The type who walked in, ran their fingers over the sleek exteriors of million-dollar cars, and left without even asking about the price. The old man, however, paid no attention to the sideways glances and whispers. He strolled through the dealership, his eyes scanning the rows of luxury cars. Sleek sports models, elegant sedans, and exclusive limited editions that only a handful of people in the world could afford. He moved with a slow, deliberate pace, stopping occasionally to admire the craftsmanship, the details, the precision. It wasn't long before one of the salesmen approached him, his smile forced and his tone laced with impatience. "Sir, can I help you with something?" The words sounded polite, but the message was clear. "You don't belong here." The old man nodded and gestured toward a deep blue sports car with leather interiors. "This one," he said, his voice calm but firm. "Tell me about it." The salesman barely held back a sigh. "That's our latest model. Starts at around $350,000, he said, his tone now colder. "Very exclusive." He expected the old man's eyes to widen, for him to let out a whistle of disbelief. But the man simply nodded. "I'd like to take a closer look," he said, stepping toward the car. Before he could get too close, the salesman put out a hand, blocking his way. "Sir, we don't allow just anyone to touch these cars," he said, his patience running thin. "They're for serious buyers only." The old man turned his head slightly, his sharp eyes locking onto the salesman's. "And what makes someone a serious buyer?" The salesman hesitated, but then his gaze traveled once again over the man's faded clothes, his worn-out sneakers. He didn't even try to hide the smirk on his lips as he answered, "Well, for starters, they can actually afford it." A few feet away, another salesman chuckled. "Maybe he just wants a photo for his collection," he joked, earning laughter from a couple of his colleagues. The old man remained quiet for a moment, his expression unreadable. Then, without another word, he turned and began walking toward the exit. The salesman didn't bother stopping him. If anything, they felt relieved, one less time waster to deal with. But what they didn't know was that this wasn't just any old man. As he stepped outside, he pulled out his phone and made a call. His voice was calm, but there was an unmistakable hint of amusement. "I need you to meet me at the dealership. Bring the checkbook." The person on the other end didn't question him. They simply responded, "I'll be there in 10 minutes." Inside the dealership, the salesman had already moved on, chatting with a young man in a designer suit who had just walked in. He was interested in a car, but from the way he hesitated with every price mentioned, it was clear he was more interested in impressing than actually buying. Yet the salesman treated him with warmth and enthusiasm, showering him with attention. Then the glass doors swung open again. The old man walked back in, but this time he wasn't alone. A second man followed, a well-dressed associate carrying a sleek black briefcase. The moment they stepped inside, the laughter in the showroom faded. Something had shifted. The same salesman who had dismissed him earlier frowned, looking slightly confused. "Sir, is there something else you needed?" he asked hesitantly. The old man nodded, his lips curling into the smallest of smiles. "Yes," he said, his voice calm but firm. "I'd like to buy the car." The room fell silent. The salesmen exchanged glances, unsure if they had heard correctly. "Excuse me?" one of them finally asked, disbelief in his voice. The old man stepped forward, looking straight at the salesman who had mocked him just minutes ago. Then, with deliberate movement, his associate opened the briefcase, revealing a neatly stacked pile of crisp $100 bills. The salesman's jaw tightened, his face turning a shade paler. "I believe I asked for serious buyers only," the old man said, his tone carrying a quiet authority. "Now, am I serious enough for you?" And at that moment, the entire dealership realized their mistake. But what happened next? Well, let's just say they weren't ready for it. This introduction sets up intrigue, builds emotional engagement, and leaves the audience hooked, eager to see how the story unfolds. Let me know if you'd like any tweaks. The room felt heavy with silence. The salesmen who had left earlier now stood frozen, their confidence draining away as fast as the color from their faces. The old man, calm and composed, watched them carefully, as if waiting to see who would break first. The one who had mocked him the most, the young man in the navy suit, cleared his throat, trying to regain his professional tone. "Sir, I apologize if there was any misunderstanding earlier," he said, forcing a tight smile. "Of course, we'd be happy to assist you with your purchase." But the old man didn't move. He simply studied the salesman, his gaze unwavering. It wasn't anger in his eyes. It was something deeper, disappointment perhaps. A quiet understanding of how quick people were to judge. The associate beside him remained silent, holding the briefcase open just enough for the stacks of cash to be visible. The other salesmen shifted uncomfortably, their earlier amusement now replaced by tension. A manager, who had been watching the whole scene from his office window, finally stepped forward, his face stretched into an eager smile. "Sir, welcome back," he said, his voice smoother than the others. "I believe there's been some confusion. Please allow us to properly assist you." The old man tilted his head slightly, as if considering the offer. "Confusion?" he echoed. His voice was quiet, but it carried weight. "No, I don't think so. I think everything was quite clear." The young salesman in the navy suit flinched slightly. The old man took a slow step forward, his eyes drifting over the cars. "You see," he continued, his tone steady, "when I walked in here earlier, I wasn't looking for a car. I was looking for something else." He turned his gaze back to the salesman. "Respect." The words hung in the air. The manager's smile faltered slightly, and the young salesman lowered his head. "I've been fortunate in life," the old man went on, "but I wasn't always rich. I started with nothing. I've worked in factories, slept on floors, gone days without food. And I've learned something. Real wealth isn't just about money. It's about how you treat people." The room remained still. Even the other customers had started to listen, sensing that something significant was unfolding. Then the old man's expression softened just a little. "But I'm not here to lecture," he said. "I'm here to buy a car." The manager jumped at the opportunity. "Absolutely, sir. We have several excellent options. Why don't we step into my office? We can arrange everything comfortably." The old man smiled faintly. "No need," he said. He turned back to the car he had admired earlier, the deep blue sports car with the leather interior. "I'll take this one." The manager nodded quickly, motioning for the young salesman to handle the paperwork. The young man hesitated, then walked forward stiffly, avoiding eye contact with the old man. His hands trembled slightly as he held out the purchase documents. The old man took the papers but didn't sign them right away. Instead, he looked at the young salesman and asked, "Tell me something. If I hadn't come back with cash in hand, would you have treated me any differently?" The salesman swallowed hard, knowing there was no right answer. I made a mistake, sir," he admitted quietly. The old man studied him for a long moment. Then with a nod, he took the pen and signed the papers. As he handed them back, he said, "Mistakes are fine. It's what you learn from them that matters." The manager, eager to smooth things over, clapped his hands together. "Fantastic. We'll have the car ready for you shortly." The old man nodded, but then glanced at his associate. Without a word, the man in the suit reached into the briefcase, pulled out the full amount in cash, and placed it on the salesman's desk. A ripple of shock went through the room. Most luxury car buyers pay through transfers or financing. But this was something else. The old man turned to the stunned salesman. "Consider this my way of proving a point," he said. "Never judge a book by its cover. You never know who you're turning away." And with that, he walked out. As the doors swung shut behind him, the young salesman remained standing there, looking at the pile of cash, at the papers he had just processed, and at the reflection of himself in the showroom's glass walls. He had come to work that morning thinking he knew everything about sales, about customers, about people. But now he wasn't so sure. And somewhere outside, the old man slid into the back seat of a black luxury car that had been waiting for him. His associate closed the door behind him. As they pulled away, the old man allowed himself a small, knowing smile. Because he hadn't just bought a car today. He had left behind a lesson. One that wouldn't be forgotten anytime soon. As the old man's car disappeared down the road, the dealership remained eerily quiet. The air inside was thick with something unspoken, a mix of embarrassment, regret, and deep reflection. The young salesman, still standing behind his desk, stared at the stack of cash as if it were some kind of lesson carved in stone. He had spent years believing he could judge a customer by their appearance, that wealth came wrapped in designer suits and expensive watches. But today had shattered that illusion. The manager, trying to shake off the awkward tension, finally clapped a hand on the young salesman's shoulder. "Let's get that paperwork finalized," he said, his voice lighter than he felt. "Make sure the car is detailed and ready for delivery." The young salesman nodded, forcing himself to move, but his mind was elsewhere. As he gathered the paperwork, his hands were steady again, not out of confidence, but out of understanding. He had just made the biggest sale of his career, yet it didn't feel like a victory. Instead, it felt like a wake-up call. Days passed, but the memory of that afternoon lingered like an echo in the showroom. The staff whispered about it, passing along different versions of the story. Some exaggerated the details, saying the old man was secretly a billionaire, or that he owned half the city. Others took it as a warning, a reminder that no one should be judged too quickly. Then one afternoon, a letter arrived at the dealership. It was addressed to the young salesman. The envelope was thick, the paper heavy. Inside, there was no sender's name, just a neatly folded note and a check clipped to the edge. The handwriting was elegant, precise. "A lesson well learned is worth more than a sale. Keep this, not as a reward, but as a reminder. Respect costs nothing, but it's worth everything." The young salesman's breath hitched as he unfolded the check. His eyes widened. The amount was far more than his commission, far more than he could have ever expected. His hands trembled slightly, but this time not out of nervousness. It wasn't just about money. It was about what it meant. That day, he made a decision. He wouldn't just be another salesman chasing numbers. He would treat every customer, rich, poor, young, old, with the same level of respect. Because at the end of the day, success wasn't just about what you sold. It was about what you left behind. And somewhere in another part of the city, the old man sat on a quiet balcony, looking out over the skyline. He sipped his tea, the corners of his lips curling into a small, knowing smile. He had once been a young man just like that salesman, once been judged for what he wore, what he drove, how he looked. But life had a way of teaching lessons in the most unexpected ways. And sometimes the best way to teach was to let others discover the truth for themselves.